Nina Stefanovna was my stepmother's cousin. She spent practically all her conscious life in the village, managing all her household on her own. Her husband, unfortunately, left her alone a long time ago. And in her old age, Aunt Nina lost her only daughter, Svetlana, who was in an accident with her fiancé. The fiancé died on the spot, but Sveta was in a coma for a long time. But she was never able to recover. I did not know her well, practically did not communicate with her, so I did not grieve. But I was sincerely sorry for Nina Stefanovna, on whose shoulders lay also the responsibility for the upbringing of the only granddaughter, Glasha. She was a clever girl, but she was very naughty and terribly fast. You can't keep track of her, although there, in the village, so free that Nina Stefanovna did not particularly complain about her granddaughter. And besides, Glasha looked so much like her dead mother that Aunt Nina could not be angry with her. In general, they lived in their village very friendly, but not for long. 3 years after Lena's death, Glasha was gone. We will learn about the circumstances of her death later. Now, it is very important to say what a blow it was for Nina Stefanovna. She was ill for several months, unable to eat, drink, or speak. I visited her whenever possible. She and my stepmother were related, but relations between them were strained. After all, I live in the city, far from that village. But every time it was unbearably painful for me to look at Aunt Nina's withered face, her faded eyes and sunken cheeks, her faded eyes and sunken cheeks. I really wanted to do something to help her, to comfort her, to cheer her up, but I had no idea how. Nina Stefanovna's heart was already broken from so many losses. An inconsolable, grieving, lonely heart. I agonized for a long time, but still gathered my courage and offered Aunt Nina to move in with me. My apartment is spacious, not in the city center, where the exhaust fumes make my eyes water, but in a quiet neighborhood, planted with tall and, most importantly, numerous trees. I remember the moment when I voiced my proposal. I remember what glassy eyes Aunt Nina looked at me. It was as if her gaze read, "How can you, the city's manicured bimbo, help me? And how can your mortgaged, cold, and empty apartment save me? Your beloved stepmother, for all time, came only once, and then only slipped her face in the room and cleaned up quickly. You probably come out of boredom. Maybe you even have your eye on my property." Yes, of course. It wasn't like that. I know that now. But then I felt really nasty, and even somehow ashamed. Really, I thought, what was I thinking? We're not even related. She's just my stepmother's cousin, that's all. In a depressed state, I returned home to the city, and for a long time, I did not dare to visit Nina Stefanovna. Until one morning, I was awakened by a phone call. Imagine how great was my surprise when my cell phone screen showed Aunt Nina's number. Without a second's hesitation, I pressed the button and put the phone to my ear, and the voice was inexpressibly pleasant to hear. It meant that she had come to her senses and could still fight for life. I got off work early that day, and in the evening, Aunt Nina and I were already packing. You know, I can't remember the last time I felt so happy. I was warmed by the thought that I had practically saved a person from seemingly imminent death, because now, Nina Stefanovna was on her feet, talking, albeit little, and even smiled 2 or 3 times. We stayed in the village for the night, deciding that the road would be more pleasant in the morning. I do not know how Aunt Nina slept, but I tossed and turned for a long time and could not sleep. I had a strange feeling of uneasiness. Also, the sound of footsteps, as if someone with wet, bare feet was treading near my door. I even got up and checked, but no one was there. I managed to fall asleep, though I had a headache in the morning. But it was nothing compared to that wonderful feeling of anticipation of life together with Nina Stefanovna, who became really dear to me. Wow, what grandiose plans I had. Aunt Nina was waiting for a whole rehabilitation program, which was based on care, affection, and love. No, I did not hope to replace her daughter or granddaughter, but I wanted to become a close friend for her, helping her out of any trouble. And at first, everything went really well, even beautifully. Although I was very nervous, thinking that Nina Stefanovna will not be able to get used to the noisy city. Besides, she was separated from her native home, where she was born and grew up, where she worked every piece of land with care, where she and her husband had once hammered every nail. But everything turned out to be not as I expected. Aunt Nina didn't show any homesickness, at least not outwardly. On the contrary, she was very interested in learning about the city. We walked in parks, squares, fed pigeons in yards, went to cozy little cafes. My apartment was noticeably transformed. I'm a girl, mostly business. I do not have time to organize home coziness, but with Aunt Nina, everything became different. I, for example, could not think how pleasing to the eye curtains of pink shades. I couldn't stand that color. And the flowers. It's a real green, blooming miracle. And the framed photos on the shelf. It's so warming in the evenings. It's even more than I expected. And I thought I'd be the one to take care of Aunt Nina. It turned out to be the other way around. I needed care, and Nina Stefanovna needed someone to whom she could give it. Oh, I would have given a lot if this harmony between us had lasted as long as possible. But all good things come to an end. Sooner or later, my happiness ended one day. One day I came home from work late in the evening, quite tired, but in a good mood, because it is always nice to return to the house, where you are welcome and loved. But from the doorstep, I immediately felt that something was wrong. The lights in the whole apartment were off. The TV was making suspicious, hissing noises, and also the smell, a horribly nasty, swampy smell. I called Nina Stefanovna, but she didn't respond. I looked first into the kitchen, where a bag of flour, a bowl, and eggshells were lying peacefully on the table, and an egg was spread on the floor. Then she went into the hall. Aunt Nina was sitting on the sofa, staring at the gray TV screen with wide-open eyes. To be honest, I was a little scared. I had never seen such strange behavior before. I gently touched Aunt Nina's shoulder, asking if she was okay. She woke up, twitched, and stared at me. For a few seconds, Nina Stefanovna stared at my face, as if she didn't recognize it. Aunt Nina, it's me. Something happened, I asked. There was no answer, but Nina Stefanovna's gaze warmed, and I heard a relieved exhalation. Aunt Nina smiled wanly and stroked my cheek. I couldn't say it was particularly comforting, but I breathed a sigh of relief. It's okay. I just felt a little sick, but it passed. Don't worry, Xenia. I changed the channel on the TV and turned on the light. The house was idyllic again. The unpleasant odor, by the way, also disappeared, but I took a note to contact a plumber. I wish that was the end of our troubles, but no. That was just the flowers. The berries were still to come. Every day since then, the apartment has been a mess. In the mornings and evenings, I was haunted by the musty smell of damp, mold, and swamp. With the pipes, we had everything normal, so I could not identify the cause of this stench. But okay, the smell. My working papers, documents, folders from time to time suddenly and out of the blue turned out to be wet through and through. Further, this phenomenon began to spread to my clothes. From the things that I so diligently ironed and polished all evening, the morning dripped water. Thankfully, the appliances didn't suffer. But that didn't change the fact that I couldn't find a reasonable explanation for what was happening. Aunt Nina was also suspiciously silent. Her clothes, by the way, were dry and untouched. Something else interesting. As you realized, water began to follow me almost everywhere, but the plants in the apartment dried up. The ground in the pots, no matter how much I watered the flowers in the evening or morning, after a while again became so dry, as if no one ever watered these flowers. They withered, and every last one of them had to be thrown out. At home, it was getting colder and more unbearable every day. And Nina Stepanovna changed. She distanced herself from me, began to lock herself in her room more often, and, most horribly of all, to keep silent. I was terribly annoyed by the sepulchral silence that seemed to have settled in our house. The terrible thing was that I began to be silent too, because I didn't know what to talk about. And I didn't know what to talk about because I didn't understand what was happening to Aunt Nina and how to help her. In just a few weeks, everything became so difficult, bad and uncomfortable, that it was like howling at a wolf. And one day, coming home from work in the evening, I habitually did not say hello to Aunt Nina, who was sitting on the sofa in the hall and did not even look in her direction. That's why I didn't immediately notice what a mess had happened there. Only then I saw and was stunned. Our pink curtains, which we had bought together, were all tattered. The wallpaper was in the same trouble. The whole carpet was covered with glass from broken photo frames, and more marks. I could clearly see little barefoot, wet footprints on the carpet. The whole thing just didn't make sense to me. Who could have done all this? And why? Nothing was stolen. It's just ruined and tattered. And, oh my God, that foul odor seemed to be getting stronger. I didn't realize it at first because of my shock, but then I instinctively put my hand over my nose. At the same moment, Aunt Nina rushed to me in tears. She steel grip clutched at my shoulders and began to intermittently speak. "Sunya, we need to leave. Quickly leave. She will not go away. Will not calm down. I thought she would leave me alone if I leave. Start all over again. What am I supposed to do now? I'm an old fool." Nina Stepanovna would probably have sobbed for a long time, but I have a wonderful ability not to give in to the feelings and panic. I calmed my aunt down with all my strength and went with her to the kitchen, sat her down at the table, and put a glass of water in front of her. Aunt Nina tried to say something to me. She kept sobbing, but I vaguely remember it. I concentrated on making tea and taking the dishes out of the hinged locker, only now not to snap and not to raise my voice at Nina Stepanovna, because this hysteria was clearly beginning to irritate me. Do not think badly of me. I perfectly understood her condition, but sobbing is not going to fix the matter. I had to act and think with a sober head, and my aunt's behavior at that moment threw me off balance. But still, Nina Stepanovna calmed down and took her cup of tea. I sat down next to her, looked into her eyes, and asked her cautiously, "Anin, do you know who did it?" Nina Stepanovna looked at me for a long time, inquisitively, almost without blinking, and barely holding back a new stream of tears. At that moment, it seemed to me as if I were interrogating her like some kind of prisoner. "Yes, Perhaps I can be too harsh sometimes. So I decided to slow down. I took Aunt Nina's hand, as if to let her know that she had nothing to fear, that I was at home with her, and that I still loved her. "Glasha," my aunt answered me in a squeezed voice. It's hard to describe my feelings. At first, I didn't understand how it was. But the longer I kept silent and looked at Aunt Nina's face, the more I was convinced that she was absolutely serious about it. And how could I believe it? "Zusha, listen," continued Aunt Nina. "It's me. I'm to blame for the death of my granddaughter. She was so fast. Try to keep track of her. I was tending to the house, putting things in order, and Glasha was walking outside. I hear her shouting to me, 'Grandma, I can go to the river with the girls.' So I let her go. I thought the older girls would look after her there. But it turns out there were no girls. My Glasha knew I wouldn't let her go alone, so she made it up. And I, an old fool, didn't follow up control. It was getting dark, and Glasha was still gone. I got worried. I decided to go look for her, but only went out into the yard as a neighbor boy comes running. Says, "Found my Glasha in the river. Oh, Zunya, how my guilt gnaws at me. Does not give rest. Who knew?" Here. Aunt Nina sobbed again, covering her face with her hands. I hugged her as tightly as I could, but I was completely distraught. I knew that Glasha had drowned, but how much Nina Stefanovna blamed herself for it. And worst of all, I didn't know what to say to her. Shall I tell her that I imagined it? That it wasn't Glasha, but someone. Who could it have been? Someone. Oh God, and those footprints on the carpet, and all the strange things that have been happening in the house lately. How do you explain it all? Especially when I look into my aunt's eyes, and I can see clearly that she's not crazy. She's scared, shocked, exhausted, panicked, but by no means insane. What is it then, really? A ghost? I don't know. I seemed to keep my cool, but I had absolutely no idea how to act or what to do. Suddenly, Aunt Nina stopped crying, raised her head and said to me, "Sunya, let's go to bed. I'm so tired for this day, and you too. And tomorrow, we'll talk." The morning is wiser in the evening. Well, I couldn't agree more. It was the only sensible thing to do. I didn't even clean up the hall. Just fell on the bed trying to think it through, but I couldn't. I fell asleep immediately. I woke up at lunchtime, when the summer sun was shining brightly outside the window, but the apartment was suspiciously quiet. Getting out of bed, I immediately headed to the hall, and there, everything was fine. The wallpaper, curtains, and picture frames were intact. The carpet was clean, not a single stain. Order reigned not only in the hall, but everywhere. Clothes that had been drying on the radiator were hanging in the closet. Water. Damaged papers were in my desk. It smelled pretty good, and even the flowers were green in their pots. Everything was as before, except for one thing. Nina Stefanovna. I didn't find my aunt in the apartment, nor her things. By the way, my first thought, I couldn't stand it and went home. But no sooner had I packed up and left after her than my phone vibrated. A man's voice reported that Knyazeva Nina Stefanovna was found dead today, in the river,